Is this ban of Parlor and then also Trump, does that remove a tail risk or does it increase tail risk?
I think in the short term, it removes some of the impetus to regulate these companies, which come from unified democratic government. So while maybe they were interested in revisiting Section 230 because they don't like the content moderation policies of Twitter or Facebook, now this is Twitter saying, "Hey, we got this. We can extremist behavior. We're taking a new approach to it." Longer term, I think this is really destabilizing for U.S. politics generally because you're going to have the big tech companies become the bad guys of the right, while the conservative voices are largely silenced for participating in the debate at the choice of these concentrated economic platforms. So I think that's not sustainable, and there's going to be backlash against these companies. But as your previous guest said, it's really hard to know what form that's going to come in for now.
Joe, is this censorship? And if not, why not?
It's clearly censorship. They're preventing certain types of people from having access to a speech platform on a very content-based because of the content of what they're saying. So they're obviously censoring them. You can argue that there's a public safety angle here because they're inciting violence and that sort of thing. But I think what Twitter did is a 2 on the scale. I think what by Google, Apple, and AWS deplatforming Parler and not allowing the entire platform to get access to their servers is a much bigger deal. And that's much broader than just one user. And it suggests that they're willing to use the power they have to go after speech they don't like. And so I think they need really bright line rules here. And even those bright line rules are going to be really, really hard to enforce for them. And when Republicans get back in power, which will inevitably happen, they're going to have all these rules are going to be examined once again.
Also, I'm curious as to how this changes or just evolves the Section 230 conversation, because if you're going to take away the liability shield, but then say they can't remove bad things because of the First Amendment, like how can you have both for these companies?
Well, I don't think anybody's saying they can't remove these things because of the First Amendment. The First Amendment applies to government censoring speech. These are private businesses that are choosing who they want to do business with and what kind of speech they want to let on their platform. That is totally legitimate as far as I understand. I'm not a lawyer here, of course. But when it comes to Section 230, and my other understanding is that Section 230 actually provides them the protection to do this kind of content moderation. So 230, the liability shield is really important for these companies to allow them to go ahead and make decisions about what content they have on there. I think Democrats have largely been saying they're not using that responsibly to police the dangerous, hateful invective that you've seen on Twitter over the last 5 years or so during the Trump era.
Joe, in 2 years' time, in 4 years' time, the US political system needs to work and people need to have trust in the elections. It would be very damaging to have a repeat of what has just happened. How does this help prevent that happening? Or do you worry that this will end up exacerbating the lack of credibility that the US electoral system currently has?
There's loads of evidence out there about how social media spreads disinformation and how a lot of the protesters who showed up on Wednesday and incited the riot were victims of that disinformation. So, social media is, you've got a problem now where the gatekeepers for information to the citizenry have gone away. And you don't have, a handful of networks or editors or responsible reporters who care about getting the facts right. You've got this really fractured ecosystem with a lot of bad information out there. And the facts bear out that this election was actually rather secure. There's very little fraud that happened, and there was nothing even close to a scale that would have overturned the election. So you'd hope that the facts kind of win out in the day in 4 years, but you've got to do something to deal with this misinformation environment. And right now, that responsibility falls to the tech companies. I expect over the next 2 to 4 years, you're going to see the government try to get more involved in regulating that kind of speech. But that's a really tricky thing to accomplish. And I don't know if during the first Biden term is going to be the time frame in which to do that.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because there's a lot of things now that President Biden has to do. He has stimulus. He has a really terrible vaccine rollout by all accounts in most states. And now there's a possible impeachment of President Trump. Well, can Congress walk and chew gum at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't really think this changes in any way the Biden priorities, which are going to be, 1, 2, and 3, coronavirus. And then, the economy, healthcare, and probably climate change, I think are still dominant issues on his agenda. this issue of regulating speech and impeaching the president. I mean, it's a mostly symbolic impeachment, and of course, symbols are important. And the president did. There's ample evidence the president incited a act of violence against a co-equal branch of government, which suggests, I think that the founders might argue that that was grounds for removal from office. He's going to be gone, though, and whether it's censure or impeachment, it's largely a symbolic act. Maybe they can bar him from running for office in the future, but he's, probably at the end of his political career anyway. So I think Biden's got plenty of other things to do, and they'll be able to focus on all that stuff in due time.
Joe, just sticking with the priorities, as you say, it is dealing with the virus 1, 2, and 3. But one of the ways you deal with the virus is to lessen the economic impacts, and that is delivering stimulus. Is there a concern that time taken, sorry if I can learn to speak correctly, dealing with it, even if it is censure, is time that is taken away from focusing on delivering the stimulus that the American people need?
I really don't think so. I think there's ample time. You've got until mid-March before unemployment benefits start running out. We've got $600 checks that are just hitting people's bank accounts right now from the last round of stimulus. You still have the $300 weekly bonus UI payment. And I think the real question mark is how long can state and local governments hang on before they start really having to cut back on services? So that probably becomes a more urgent issue at the end of Q1. But you've got months here to deliver additional stimulus. You've got a totally separate process that doesn't even involve Congress that will get the vaccination rollout back on track. And I just don't think that this is going to be something that really harms President Biden, as long as he can get his confirmations done quickly, which he can because of the rules change in the Senate that cut down the amount of hours it takes to confirm anybody.